All right. Thank you so much, Professor Williams, for joining me today to talk about your journey becoming a composer and your music and your philosophy towards composition.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here. Yeah.
Thank you. And first of all, do you mind if I ask for like a short introduction on your music and yourself?
Sure. Well, I'm a pianist and a composer. So that might be a little different than some of the people you're interviewing for your project. And I've really, the two sides of my musical life have always been very connected, very intersected. Um, I I don't think I could give up one without really hurting the other side, right? Like they're really both essential, being a pianist and a composer together. Um, and so I grew up in Buffalo, New York. I'm the daughter of two professional musicians. So unlike also a lot of people who start this life, wonderful life of being a musician, for me it was kind of the family business that I went into. It was very familiar. Three of my four grandparents were pianists of some level, you know. Um, and so music always felt very like a very important part of my upbringing and my life. But that didn't mean that was my only option. I went to college. I went to Bennington College in Vermont, which is a very small liberal arts college. And I thought I might be a theater major, or I might be a French literature major, or I might be a psychology major. But I got very drawn to the music program there, which was really small, and there weren't a lot of pianists. And so I felt kind of special there because I'd been playing the piano since I was 5 years old. And then when I was there, I started composing. Well, actually, that's a lie. My first composition was my senior class song in high school.
Oh.
That's the very first thing I ever wrote. But then I started composing at Bennington. Every student had to compose who was taking music classes. And so I I was fascinated by this. I had grown up meeting composers, going to contemporary music concerts, and I always thought those were the most interesting people. Um, there's something about those composers. They were very interesting, eccentric, interested in a lot of different things. And so when I started composing, I thought, well, this was really challenging, but really interesting, and something that I would continue to do. I also played the flute at the time,
Mm.
but then I had to decide I couldn't do piano composition and flute, so I gave up the flute and started composing more. And then I went back to Buffalo where I grew up for graduate school because I was able to do a master's degree in piano performance and a PhD in composition at the same time. And I wanted to do both, and I had great teachers for both of those areas. So I did my graduate work in Buffalo, and then I went back to Bennington to teach, and then I went to Northwestern to teach for 5 years, and then I've been teaching at the University of Pittsburgh for almost 20 years, since 2005.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing. And
Yeah.
or some of the composers that really inspired you.
Well, growing up, my father is a percussionist, and so percussionists are all focused on contemporary music, of course. And he worked with some of the most important composers of the late 20th century in this capacity in Buffalo. It was kind of a center for new music there. And so I got to meet composers like John Cage and Morton Feldman and Elliott Carter and Julius Eastman. My dad worked with Xenakis, wrote him a piece, and Frederick Shevsky. And so all these composers were around, and that was kind of an amazing experience. So I think that I pulled different things from different composers. and been very inspired by composers who are also performers, like, you know, Stravinsky. You've heard of him, right? Pretty amazing model. So composers, yeah, composers like Frederick Rzewski, like um, composers who, yeah, who also have that kind of performance sensibility, I think have been important. But also, I've been influenced by Ligeti and well, Stravinsky's always a big one. And Varese, I think, is an important composer for me. And so, yeah, trying to pull, though, not to imitate anyone, but trying to pull from what is intriguing, what is interesting from each previous composer, and then trying to say something new that hasn't been said before is always the challenge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's actually quite interesting because I was kind of thinking about this a little earlier. A lot of people nowadays or for a while have been saying, for a musician, for a performer or a composer, you need to have some sort of very specific style that you compose in, like a signature, like style that can that can help others distinguish you from other musicians.
Mhm.
But I was also thinking, we can be musical mutts as well, we can take, like you said, we can take from different composers and we can, create something new from that. And I think that's a super interesting topic.
And something you have to really always try to do as a composer, which is not to just replicate what you have done before. I when I teach, I often think about, try to get students to think about what they feel comfortable doing, and then always very intentionally trying to stretch that, to push that to
Mm,
something that's not what they feel comfortable doing, because that's how we grow as artists, right? And that's the same with performers too.
I agree.
You can't just play it the way you always play it,
Yes.
because
And
it doesn't grow, right? You
yes.
don't grow.
And do you feel that your experience as a pianist, like, in and as a composer, like, influences each other, like the different aspects of your life?
Absolutely, absolutely. I I mean, I often write pieces, like especially chamber pieces, I'm writing them for specific performers. And what inspires me is not just, oh, they can play really well, but more detailed than that, it's how do they play well? What do they like to play? What are their special strengths? What's their approach to their instrument? And how can I draw inspiration from that?
Yeah.
And also, how do chamber musicians communicate? How do they talk to each other? How do they cue each other? How do they work on getting this better together? And those kinds of incredible conversations that happen in a rehearsal, I find inspiring as a composer.
That's interesting because only a person who's a performer as well and who knows the perspective of the performer can understand how valuable that is.
Right.
A- And I'm wondering, like, can you put that into context with one of your pieces that you've written?
Well, I've written a lot of piano forehand pieces.
Mm.
When I was in graduate school in Buffalo, I met a pianist, Elena Bugallo, and we have been in a piano duo for over 25 years now.
Oh, wow.
And so that friendship and musical relationship has been something that's been very informative to me as a composer and just as a human being. And so when I'm writing for piano for hands, I'm thinking, of course, about that experience of sitting in the piano, but not in the middle of the piano, sitting at the top of the piano or sitting at the bottom of the piano, and thinking about how these four arms are going to cross, and right, and how we're going to share this piano together.
Right.
And the very beginning of a old piece I wrote for the two of us, abstracted art, the beginning is just one note and then two grace notes to that same note, right? But one person plays this note and somebody else plays the two grace notes that go to that note, right?
Huh.
And the thing about a grace note is it's not rhythmic, it's not in time. It's contextual. It leads to that note.
Yes.
So just that, it's very easy for one person to play that, but to sync up and coordinate in that way, right? To have that's really what the whole piece was about, was thinking about how we're going to pass things off, and right, and listen to each other and respond to each other, and that was really the most important part of how I wrote that piece, was thinking about that medium of piano four hands in a very specific way, and our particular four hands
Right.
even more specifically, right?
Mhm.
Other people have played the piece, but thinking really about that interaction. So I think that is the way performers interact is something that is I'm just always thinking about. Even when I'm writing a piece for orchestra, I'm
Mm.
still thinking about the individuals on the stage, even if I don't know them. I'm thinking about how the flutes are going to listen to the double basses, and trying to because that's what's so special about being a musician, I think, is the social interaction that happens.
Yes, I agree. And you seem to be very inspired by individuals, like individual composers who listened to and individuals you've met and are writing for. Um, do you have any other places you take inspiration from that are not humans, that are not people or individuals?
Yes, I would say that almost all of my pieces are inspired by something outside of well, maybe it's about half. Half of my pieces are inspired by some musical situation, and half are inspired by something outside of music.
Mm.
And so that could be a concept of philosophy. It could be paintings of Gerhard Richter. It could be the piece that I'm writing right now is for bassoon and piano, and it's inspired by the last lines of different poems.
Oh,
I have a piece that I wrote, oh, quite a few years ago, called First Lines, and now I'm writing a piece called Last Lines. And taking
interesting.
the same poets, but finding different poems, and thinking about how they can wrap up or end a poem in a way. And so it's a series of miniatures that it responds to poetry. So text is often very important. And so I try to pull from film, or various art forms or not art forms, to find some seed to start the piece off.
Mm. And
Um, yeah.
may I ask, who are your favorite writers or directors or yeah, artists?
Oh, my favorite writers and directors. That's really tricky. I have a piece that's inspired by Samuel Beckett. I think Beckett is a really important writer, fascinating writer. The poets they're wonderful. The ones I found these poems almost 20 years ago when I was just in an artist residency, and I was looking through the library, and they had all been residents at this residency program. So these, I wouldn't say I'm experts in their poems, but I've pulled some of them that I think are really, really fascinating. I have a whole series of pieces inspired by different films. And so one of them is a Hitchcock film. One of them is a Mike Figgis film. These are wonderful, amazing films.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I would say, um, even if I have a favorite, I'm trying to always find new things,
Right, right, right.
so that
Yeah.
I'm not just like inspired by Beckett over and over and over again, but trying to find other writers or trying to find connections between music and other creative arts. So
Mm.
yeah.
Yes, and so a follow-up question is, because you're always trying new things, what are any like um potential ideas or areas that you would like to explore with your compositions?
That I haven't yet.
Yes.
Oh, so many areas. Yes. I would say that I am finding ways to work with the human voice. That's been something that's been really challenging for me. Some people are so amazing at writing for the voice, and that is their inspiration. And for me, the voice is really challenging.
Mm.
And so I'm trying to find ways to do that, different ways to do that. So I would like to write a more like a substantial, I mean, I have some pieces for voice, but I'd like to write um more vocal music, maybe in opera, I don't know, someday, right?
Yes.
But that is that is something I haven't done a lot of, but there are always new combinations of instruments. I'm writing after this bassoon and piano piece, I'm writing a string trio. I've never written a string trio. I've written several string quartets, but now I'm trying to think, well, what is unique about the string trio, right? We're taking away one of those violins.
Yes.
And that kind of the balance of the quartet that is so familiar to me is going to shift a little bit with the string trio. And what can I do with the string trio that will be different?
Mhm.
So that will be the next piece. I haven't figured that one out yet, but I will have to.
Yeah, interesting. And I want to ask, this is now a little bit about your upbringing in music. So, you were exposed to music at from a very young age, and so, and you said your first composition was your senior project,
My senior class song,
senior class
our
song.
high school song, that we all sang at graduation.
Oh my God. Whether it's that or whether it's like your first compositions in college, do you feel like your music has changed since then? I'm guessing it has, but how has it changed?
Oh, it certainly has, from my senior class song. We're leaving now, it's time to go, right?
Okay.
Haven't written a tune quite like that since then. Um, yes, it has, I think, evolved. But I think there's probably something that stayed, right? Certain harmonies that I like, or I think that because the piano is so much a part of my approach to music, I think that certain harmonies that come from the piano, or certain approaches to orchestration that come from the piano. So I think that there is a sense of, even when I'm not writing for piano, there's something about the piano that is informative about my musical language.
Mhm.
I will leave that to the musicologists to figure out exactly what that is.
Okay.
But I think that there is something, there's a continuity there because of really being at the piano since I was born. My piano
Yes.
was moved into my house the year I was born. It was my
Oh,
grandmother's piano, and it was moved into my house, and I've been schlepping that piano around ever since. So
wow.
um, so there's some continuity. I just redid my website, and so I was trying to have more archival information there, a more detailed list and recordings and things. And so that forced me to listen to some older pieces, and I think that there's some things similar, but also hopefully things that change.
Hmm. And I like to say, let's put it into context a lot, but can we put that into context with if there was a viewer of this interview, what pieces could they listen to see that sort of continuity or that change?
I think that rhythm is also something that is pretty an interest in certain kinds of rhythm, and maybe that comes a little bit from growing up going to percussion ensemble concerts and being a pianist combined. I think that there's yeah, I'm always interested in rhythms that you can hold on to, but you can't quite, right? That are kind of this enigmatic groove is what I'm always interested in. And I think that you would hear that in old pieces and very current pieces, this interest in certain kinds of rhythms. So I think, yeah, I think that's something that would has been happening for quite some time.
All
Uh,
right. Okay. I'll listen out for that.
Rhythm, orchestration, piano, all of those come together, and then all these different kinds of inspirations from different art forms and kinds of dialogues, really. Dialogues between musicians, dialogues between art forms, dialogues between right hands and left hands, right? All those things.
I see. And I assume that even though you were exposed to music at a young age and you had a very musical life all throughout, were there any challenges that you faced when you first started composing?
Oh, every time I start composing, it's a challenge. Composing is really hard. So I will say to anybody listening to this, if performers, give your composers a break. It's really hard. um, I think finding your way as a composer is really hard. I mean, it's very rare that composers think, oh, that's a really good piece. You think, well, there's something about that one. It's not too bad. But you're always kind of trying to write that really, really good piece, right?
Right.
And I listen to really good pieces all the time, and I'm always trying to, I think if I ever write a piece that I really think is perfect, I may never write another piece
Oh.
again. So there's something about this just always striving to find a new way or try something new, it's always fascinating and really, really hard.
Mm. But
Um,
the challenge is never ending.
the challenge is never ending, and somehow we keep trying, right?
Mm.
Keep trying. But I do try to also find ways to support young composers through my teaching, through the festival that I run, through any ways that I can communicate with young
What's the
musicians.
festival called?
It's called New Music on the Point.
And where is it?
It's in Vermont.
Okay.
It's if the first 2 weeks of June every year. It's summer camp with kayaks and canoes and bunk beds and an amazing chef, two chefs now we have,
Oh wow.
and half performers, half composers, although now it's sort of a lot of people do both. So an amazing group of 50 young musicians who come up to Vermont and hang out in the woods and play new music for 2 weeks. And it's just an incredible space. So, trying to create opportunities that I didn't have at that time
Mm.
for various reasons or no reason at all. And
And
trying to, just trying to create these ways of connecting people together.
one last question is, would you have any words of advice to both students and composers because you have that perspective in playing new music and composing?
Advice for performers and composers.
Yes.
Um, my advice is to trust that you know when something is ready, when you know a piece is done or a piece is ready to be performed, or you're ready to play that piece, maybe that you've been wanting to play for a long time, maybe no, trust, listen to yourself and not to what other people tell you, but when you know you're ready to take on a project, to do that. And also understand that music, as I said, is a social art form. And practicing 16 hours a day is useful. However, it might be more useful to get out and connect with other people. And contemporary music is a great way for people to do that, performers and composers, because composers need to ask performers how to do this, and right, and performers need to ask composers, what do you mean by this?
Yeah.
And so having trying things out, experimenting, doing things you've never done before, all of that is so essential to being a musician. And so contemporary music is a great way to do that. So, you know, get out of your practice room, get away from your composition desk sometimes, and understand that you can't do this alone. You need to, you know, connect with other people. And it also makes it a lot more fulfilling and a lot more fun.
I agree. Um, well, that was such good advice, and I want to say thank you so much for your time. That's all the questions I had.
Wonderful. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for asking me. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you in Vermont next summer.